Dawn on the edge of an ice age. There was a time not so distant in the scale of the planet when ice defined the edges of the world. 50,000 years ago, Earth was in the midst of the Late Pleistocene epoch, a chapter of shifting climates, powerful migrations, and evolving minds. The landscape that stretched across Africa, Eurasia, and into the far edges of Oceania was both beautiful and brutal. A patchwork of grasslands, forests, and deserts shaped by advancing and retreating glaciers. Sea levels were so low that entire continents connected where oceans now divide. It was a time when Homo sapiens, our species, had already emerged from Africa, carrying language, fire, and imagination. They were not alone. Across Europe lived the Neanderthals, stocky, intelligent relatives adapted to cold climates. In Asia, the mysterious Denisovans occupied mountain ranges and forests. We still struggle to locate precisely in the fossil record. And in the islands of Indonesia, small-bodied humans, Homo floresiensis, sometimes called the hobbits, lived quiet, parallel lives. But it was our ancestors, the anatomically modern humans, who began to weave something new into existence: culture. The world they woke to. A typical morning began with cold breath. The camp would be nestled in a shallow valley near a water source that had never run dry, a spring, a slow-moving stream, or a seasonal lake. The shelter might be a low framework of branches, covered in animal hides, weighted with stones to resist the wind. Before dawn, a few embers still glowed at the center of camp. Archaeologists at sites like Border Cave, South Africa, and Dolní Věstonice, Czech Republic, have found evidence of fires kept alive continuously, sometimes for months. For those early humans, fire was not just warmth, it was life insurance. Someone, often the oldest or the most careful, would rise before the light, stir the coals, and feed them dry twigs. The first sparks became small flames. Smoke drifted through the still air. The smell of burning wood mixed with the faint sweetness of grass and animal fat. This was the daily ritual that tethered humanity to continuity, the chain that connected the night before to the day ahead. As the horizon brightened, the world revealed itself. Herds of steppe bison, woolly mammoths, and wild horses grazing on the open plains, cave lions and hyenas watching from ridgelines, flocks of migratory birds tracing invisible highways in the sky. These were not wildernesses untouched by man. They were shared spaces, shaped by footprints and fire, familiar to those who lived within them. The camp and its people. Most human bands at the time consisted of 20 to 40 individuals, bound by kinship and shared need. There were no cities, no villages, only movement. Camps lasted weeks, sometimes months, before the group followed the changing season to a new region. Each person had a role. Elders preserved memory, where to find flint, when to migrate, which plants could heal and which could kill. Younger adults hunted and built shelters. Children gathered firewood, fetched water, and imitated everything they saw. The first school, the first apprenticeship. A newborn's cry would have sounded no different from a baby's today. A mother's instinct was the same, her tenderness recognizable across time. Even then, the emotional blueprint of humanity was complete. Love, fear, curiosity. These were already our native tongue. Their diet was diverse. Excavations of ancient hearths reveal charred roots, nuts, tubers, berries, fish bones, and animal fat, the remains of balanced foraging. In the tropics, they used digging sticks to reach underground bulbs. In colder regions, hunting dominated, but nothing was wasted. Bones were cracked open for marrow, skins turned to clothing, tendons to cordage. Technology of necessity. By 50,000 years ago, humans had mastered the Middle to Upper Paleolithic transition, a revolution in tool-making. The so-called blade industries, thin, sharp flakes struck from prepared cores, allowed the creation of knives, scrapers, and spear points of remarkable efficiency. In Africa, tools from the Still Bay and Howisson's port cultures show early use of symbolic engraving and heat-treated stone, the earliest form of controlled engineering. In Europe, the Aurignacian culture would soon arise, bringing bone points and personal ornaments. A morning's work often began with sound, the rhythmic tapping of flint against hammerstone. A good toolmaker could read a stone like a map, anticipating how it would fracture. Every flake struck cleanly saved hours of labor later. The toolkit of an early human was portable genius, sharp enough to butcher a mammoth, precise enough to carve a flute. Nearby, a woman would be preparing cordage from plant fibers or sinew. These strings were twisted into bow drills for fire, nets for fishing, or bindings for hafting stone blades to wooden shafts. The technology was simple by modern measure, yet every piece represented thought, intention, and memory. The social brain. What made these people distinctly us was not their tools, but their minds. Cognitive scientists estimate that Homo sapiens possessed the same brain volume and nearly the same neurological wiring as modern humans. What changed was how they used it. Living in small, tight-knit groups required empathy, cooperation, and complex communication. Survival depended on predicting others' thoughts, a capacity called theory of mind. You had to know who might panic in the hunt, who could remember the safe path across the river, who might hoard food, who could be trusted. These were the first politics, the first economies of emotion. At the same time, language was becoming sophisticated. The anatomy of the larynx and genetic evidence of the FOXP2 gene show that spoken language had likely evolved fully by this era. These humans could name, describe, teach, and plan, transmitting knowledge far beyond what gesture alone could convey. The environment of survival. The Pleistocene was a world in motion. Ice cores show that temperatures fluctuated wildly, shifting entire ecosystems in decades. Steppe grasslands could become forests, rivers could vanish into sand. Humans adapted through mobility. They learned to read the world, the tilt of wind through grass, the tracks of hooves in damp soil, the changing angle of stars across the seasons. Predators were everywhere: lions, saber-toothed cats, hyenas, wolves. But humans had something none of them possessed: endurance and foresight. Unlike most animals, they could run for hours without rest, sweating to cool themselves. They could outlast prey, following wounded animals across miles. This was the birth of persistence hunting, the triumph of intelligence and physiology combined. Morning rituals of a species becoming aware. By mid-morning, the camp was alive. Smoke rose in thin columns, children played near the stream, and the smell of roasted roots drifted through the air. The group gathered around the fire to eat, to talk, to plan the day. Somewhere beyond the horizon, thunder rolled. They glanced toward the sound but did not fear it. They had seen storms come and go, and had learned that the earth's moods were not against them, merely indifferent. Every motion of their lives, sharpening tools, binding hides, preparing traps, carried the rhythm of unspoken understanding. There were no leaders, no hierarchies as we know them, only the quiet authority of knowledge. The most experienced hunter, the best healer, the wisest elder. Influence flowed through ability, not command. These were the foundations of culture, the earliest prototypes of what would later become civilization. Evening reflections. When the sun sank low and the valley turned gold, work slowed. The animals that had ranged far returned to water. The humans gathered wood again, fed the fire, and watched the world darken. No one knew that they were the beginning of something immense, that 50,000 years later, their descendants would circle the planet, build cities of light, and still seek the warmth of fire and company. For now they only knew what was necessary: the feel of wind against skin, the taste of fresh water, the fragile balance between hunger and plenty. And when the first stars appeared above the tree line, they looked up, not for navigation, but for wonder. It was not yet science, but it was the beginning of awareness. The hunt and the sharing of food. The sun has climbed higher. The air now glows with the pale heat of a late Pleistocene morning, thin and dry across the open steppe. Somewhere within this immensity a small band of humans prepares to move. Their world is mobility. Their survival depends upon motion through landscapes that are never the same twice. They have no fields to return to, no herds enclosed by fences. Instead, they follow rhythms older than memory. Migration routes of animals, the blooming of grasses, the freezing of rivers. Archaeology shows this pattern again and again. Sites such as Kostenki on the Don River, Pinnacle Point in South Africa, and Naya Cave in Borneo reveal repeated occupations, hearth layers stacked one upon another like footprints in time. People came, lived, moved on, and returned generations later, guided by stories of abundance that never needed to be written down. Reading the land. Every member of the group knows how to read terrain. They see the world not as scenery, but as a field of signals. Wind direction traced in bending grass, the sharp scent of dung, the freshness of tracks pressed into mud hunters, and gatherers were ecologists in the truest sense, able to decode the behavior of herds, the flowering of tubers, the approach of rain. In the high plains of Ice Age Eurasia, reindeer, horses, and bison formed the backbone of survival. In warmer regions, antelope and zebra played the same role. Along coasts, shellfish and fish filled the gap. Recent analysis of isotopes in fossil bones shows that Pleistocene humans ate everything edible: plants, seeds, insects, marrow, and brain tissue. Protein, fat, and carbohydrate were balanced through necessity, not design. A morning's preparation might include checking snares for small game, digging for roots, or setting fish traps woven from reeds. The division of labor was flexible. Women often foraged and trapped. Men often hunted, though evidence from modern hunter-gatherer societies suggests that women also joined large game pursuits. Survival was communal, not competitive. Weapons of intelligence. The tools they carried tell a story of invention born of patience. Wooden spears hardened in fire had existed for hundreds of millennia, but by 50,000 years ago, stone and bone tips had become refined, aerodynamic, and often hafted with resin glue and sinew, a technological fusion that would last until the dawn of metallurgy. In southern Africa, the Still Bay points reveal that heat-treated stone allowed finer edges. In Europe, the Aurignacian blades began to appear. The atlatl, or spear thrower, extended the hunter's reach, transforming human arms into mechanical leverage. With it, a well-trained hunter could strike from 30 meters away, far enough to kill without exposing themselves to hooves or tusks. Each weapon represented not only craftsmanship but foresight. A spear point chipped the wrong way could mean starvation days later. Every edge was inspected, resharpened, carried in woven slings or skin pouches. The precision of these artifacts, the symmetry, the polish, suggests an aesthetic sense as well as utility. Even survival had style. The strategy of the chase. Across the open ground, a small herd of reindeer grazes. The hunters watch from a downwind ridge, motionless against the skyline. Communication flows through gesture alone, a hand signal to flank, a nod to move. No words are needed. Anthropologists studying persistence hunters among the San of the Kalahari and the Tarahumara of Mexico believe that ancient humans relied on the same strategy, exploiting endurance rather than speed. Humans are slow sprinters, but exceptional distance runners. With sweat glands to cool the body and springy tendons to conserve energy, a team could chase an animal for hours until exhaustion forced it to stop. But persistence was dangerous. A charging aurochs could crush a hunter. An injured mammoth could scatter an entire band. For that reason, cooperation was everything. Some flushed the prey, others waited in ambush, others guarded the return route. When the moment came, it came suddenly, a rush of muscle, the whistle of spears, the thud of impact, the silence after. Rituals of the kill. Archaeological traces suggest that even at this stage of evolution, killing was never taken lightly. Cut-marked animal bones are often found alongside ochre pigments, implying symbolic acts after the hunt. Some groups may have offered parts of the carcass back to the earth. Others painted marks on their bodies or tools. Whether these were spiritual gestures or practical taboos, they reveal an early sense of ethics, a recognition that life feeds on life. The first cut in the carcass went to the most experienced butcher, using a blade of flint sharper than modern scalpels. Flesh was stripped efficiently, tendons were saved for bowstrings, marrow bones were cracked open with stone anvils. Fire completed the transformation. Cooking not only improved flavor but made calories accessible. Chemical studies show that heat gelatinized collagen and released fats crucial for surviving cold seasons. The gathering camp. By late afternoon, the hunters returned carrying meat on poles, greeted by the smell of smoke and the laughter of children. Division of labor turned again, fires stoked, hides stretched, organs roasted quickly while the rest dried over racks. What followed was more than nourishment. It was the social act that built humanity. Ethnographic parallels show that sharing meat binds groups together more tightly than kinship alone. The giver gains prestige, the receiver owes gratitude. In archaeological camps from the Levant to Siberia, communal hearths dominate the landscape, wide blackened circles surrounded by thousands of bone fragments. Each one is a record of conversation, cooperation, and trust. As dusk deepened, the camp glowed like a constellation on the steppe. Fat popped in the flames, sparks drifted into the cooling sky, and the band ate together. There were no plates, no cutlery, only fingers, stone blades, and gratitude. Children gnawed bones, elders told of previous hunts. Laughter mixed with the crackle of wood. Nutrition and survival. Biologists studying skeletal remains note signs of both hardship and adaptation. Cavities were rare, bone density was high, muscles left deep attachment scars, yet fractures and arthritis were common, proof of labor and long travel. Average lifespan hovered around 35 years, but those who reached adulthood often lived much longer. Healing fractures in Neanderthal and early Homo sapiens, fossils show community care. Someone fed and protected the injured. Food was more than energy, it was memory. Each successful hunt became a story retold at future fires. Children listened, learning terrain and timing long before holding a spear. Knowledge was their inheritance, passed not through genes alone but through language and narrative. The web of life. The human diet linked them to every part of their ecosystem. The ashes of their fires fertilized grasslands that fed herbivores. Their discarded bones became tools for scavengers. Ecologists today call such systems keystone interactions. Even then, Humans were engineers of the landscape, using controlled burns to clear vegetation, digging water holes, scattering seeds unintentionally on their migrations. The Anthropocene had not yet begun, but its first threads were being woven. The meaning of sharing. Night settles. The group sits close. Fatigue gives way to calm. Around the fire, the division of meat follows unspoken rules. Families first, elders next, single hunters last. Those who failed in the hunt still eat. Tomorrow, the order may reverse. Fairness is strategy. In unity, they outlast drought, injury, and chance. Anthropologists sometimes describe this as reciprocal altruism, but the people living it would not have recognized the term. To them, it was simple balance, the same equilibrium seen in rivers and herds. The success of one ensured the survival of all. And in this pattern lay the embryo of economy, morality, and community. Echoes of the hunt. When the fire dims to embers, only the sound of chewing fades into the dark. Dogs, or perhaps still wild wolves beginning their long domestication, linger at the perimeter. The hunters stare into the coals, replaying the day's chase in silence. Above them, auroras ripple across the polar sky, green and red curtains waving over a world that is still half ice, half dream. 50,000 years later, the habit endures. We gather to eat, to talk, to remember. We share food as we once shared survival. Every meal remains an echo of those first fires, proof that cooperation, more than strength, was the true weapon of our species. Shelter and the elements. Even in the age before walls and villages, humans had homes. Not permanent structures, but repeating places of return. Rock shelters, caves, windbreaks, and huts of bone and hide. 50,000 years ago, shelter was not architecture in the modern sense. It was adaptation shaped by weather, memory, and ingenuity. A planet in motion. The world they inhabited was restless. The late Pleistocene climate swung between extremes. Glacial winters, brief warm interstadials, sudden droughts. Ice sheets reached across northern Europe and Canada, while dust storms swept the steppes of Central Asia. In Africa and the Levant, monsoons shifted north and south, turning grasslands into desert and back again within generations. These changes were recorded not in books, but in behavior. Every migration, every new campsite, every layer of soot in a cave ceiling is a data point in humanity's early climate log. To survive required mobility. And yet, wherever they stopped, people built micro-worlds of stability. The language of shelter. Archaeology gives us glimpses of these refugees at Dolny Věstonice and Mezhyrich in today's Czech Republic and Ukraine. Circular foundations made from mammoth bones mark dwellings up to 5 meters across. Ribs served as arching supports, tusks as door frames. Hides stretched across the frame created insulation against the continental cold. In the Blombos and Klaisies river caves of South Africa, hearths and shell middens reveal smaller, seasonal occupations where people used sea breezes to keep smoke moving outward. At Shanidar Cave in Iraqi Kurdistan, sediment layers show repeated fire use and a microclimate warmer than the valley below, a natural home against glacial winds. Every shelter was a conversation with the landscape. The materials, bone, wood, hide, grass, were chosen not for permanence, but for portability and repair. They were never meant to last forever. They were meant to last long enough. Fire at the center. At the heart of every home was the hearth. Charcoal analysis shows that people selected specific woods, juniper, birch, acacia, each burning with distinct heat and scent. The fire cooked food, hardened tools, repelled insects, and defined social space. Around its glow, disputes eased, children learned, and elders remembered. For modern archaeologists, these black circles of ash are time capsules, each layer a different season, each ring of stones a mark of return. Some sites show hundreds of superimposed hearths, proof that people came back year after year, generation after generation, a rhythm that predates agriculture by tens of millennia. Clothing and cold. The shelters alone were not enough. From bone awls and ivory needles found at Kostenki, Sungir, and Zudzwana Cave, we know that people sewed tailored garments. Hide-scraping tools bear microscopic wear marks consistent with fur removal and thinning, the first steps of the fashion industry of survival. These clothes were not crude wraps. They were engineered layers. Inner furs trapped heat. Outer hides blocked wind. Sinew stitching kept seams tight. Arctic ethnographic parallels suggest that a full outfit, parka, leggings, mitts, boots, could maintain body temperature even below -20 degrees Celsius. Genetic studies reveal adaptations matching these innovations. Mutations in genes governing fat metabolism and skin pigmentation correlate with dispersal into colder latitudes. Biology and culture evolved hand in hand. Sound of storms. When weather turned, shelter became life itself. The first warning was pressure, a heaviness in the air, felt rather than seen. Then came wind, rolling across the plain like invisible surf. Inside the huts, hides trembled. Smoke shifted direction. Infants woke. Thunder echoed through valleys that lacked any word for thunder. Yet the fear it inspired was ancient and familiar. People pressed together, backs to the wind, eyes on the fire's heart. They did not worship the storm, but they respected it. When rain or snow finally passed, relief spread through motion, checking damage, wringing hides dry, cleaning ash. The storm's aftermath was clarity, streams refilled, tracks renewed, the air washed clean. This cycle of fear and renewal became the emotional calendar of early humanity. The household economy. Within these shelters, domestic life unfolded at a scale rarely captured in textbooks. There were tasks for every age. Grinding pigments, or ochre for decoration or tanning, carving bone needles and beads, repairing nets or baskets, tending the small fires used for drying meat. Tiny bone fragments and plant fibers found in cave floors show that daily chores were communal. There was no concept of private property beyond the personal toolkit or amulet. Everything else, fire, food, story, was shared. Children learned through imitation, teenagers through participation, elders through teaching. This was the first classroom, its curriculum written in smoke and muscle memory. Shelter as memory. A remarkable fact emerges from pollen and sediment studies. Some sites were reoccupied for thousands of years. That means that stories, verbal maps, must have persisted across generations. Beyond the red hill where the birches lean, the good cave lies. A phrase like that could pass through centuries, guiding descendants back to familiar walls. Every shelter was therefore not just a structure, but a repository of lineage. The layers of ash were both physical and symbolic, proof that others had survived here before. In time, this memory of place would grow into the idea of homeland. Adaptation beyond architecture. Humans also built invisible shelters, social ones, pair bonding, kin networks, and alliances between bands provided protection as real as walls. Archaeological hints of long-distance trade in obsidian and seashells show that by 50,000 years ago, humans maintained contacts over hundreds of kilometers. Exchange meant safety. If one valley failed, another could help. In this way, society itself became a shelter, a fabric of obligation and care stretching across the continents. Night in the dwelling. As darkness returned, the wind outside softened to a low hum. Inside, the fire dimmed to coals. Shadows moved gently across curved hide walls. The scent of smoke, fat, and earth mingled with the quiet breathing of sleep. To modern eyes, the scene seems primitive, yet neurologically it was the same mind we carry now. Someone stared at the fire too long and wondered what lay beyond death. Someone else worried for tomorrow's hunt. They were already human in every sense that matters. Legacy of the hearth. Archaeologists call these layers cultural strata. Each centimeter of soil contains decades of repetition. Burnt seeds, flint chips, soot, and footprints baked into mud. When modern scientists excavate them, they read a narrative of adaptation more profound than any monument. Because of those fragile walls of bone and hide, humanity endured the volatility of an Ice Age planet. When we build houses today, when we light stoves or gather by a fireplace, we unconsciously repeat that same gesture of containment, making order within the storm. Art, language, and mind. The hearths of survival gave rise to something larger, a new dimension of awareness. Around 50,000 years ago, the human brain crossed a threshold invisible in the fossil record, but unmistakable in what followed: art, music, language, and myth. The Pleistocene was no longer only a landscape of ice and hunger. It had become a landscape of imagination. The cognitive leap. Neurologically, the modern human brain had existed for nearly 200,000 years, but by this period its wiring began to express new capacities. The prefrontal cortex, seat of planning and abstraction, worked in concert with the limbic system that governed emotion. This partnership produced symbolic thought, the ability to let one thing stand for another, a sound for an idea, a mark for a memory, a story for an experience. Anthropologists call this the cognitive revolution, yet it was not a single moment. It likely unfolded over tens of millennia, nurtured by population density, longer childhoods, and social complexity. As groups grew larger, communication required nuance. As foraging territories overlapped, negotiation replaced conflict. Intelligence became the most adaptive trait on Earth. First marks, first meanings. The earliest signs appear in stone and bone. In Blombos Cave on the southern coast of Africa, archaeologists found an ochre stone etched with crosshatch patterns over 70,000 years old, geometry without function, meaning without utility. Elsewhere, at Diepkloof Rock Shelter, ostrich eggshell fragments bear repeated designs, parallel lines, chevrons, likely identifying ownership or group identity. By 50,000 years ago, this visual grammar spread across continents. In Indonesia's Sulawesi caves, negative handprints blown in red pigment mark the presence of artists older than any European painter. In Spain's El Castillo cave, dots of ochre climb the wall like constellations. In France's Chauvet, entire galleries of horses, lions, and rhinoceroses leap from the rock in flowing motion. Radiocarbon dates place them within the reach of Neanderthals as well as Homo sapiens, hinting that imagination was not ours alone. The act of painting was as important as the image itself. Pigment grinding stones, hollow bones used as blowpipes, and torches made from twisted grass suggest ritual preparation. Inside those dark chambers, light and shadow merged, flickering, animating, hypnotic. Art was performance. Creation was ceremony. The birth of language. No artifact records a spoken word, yet language leaves its trace in anatomy and genetics. The shape of the hyoid bone, supporting the tongue and larynx, in both Neanderthals and modern humans, indicates a vocal range capable of complex speech. The FOXP2 gene, crucial for language processing, shows identical modern sequences in both species. From these clues, linguists infer that by 50 millennia ago, humans possessed full syntax and recursion, the ability to nest ideas within ideas, to say not only food there, but we will go there after the storm. Language lengthened memory, extended cooperation, and allowed planning beyond the immediate horizon. Each language was a living ecology of sound. Clicks, glottal stops, vowels shaped by local resonance. Over generations, dialects branched into families, then into the diversity that would later blanket the globe. Every word we speak today descends from that first chorus around the fire. Music of the Ice Age. Where words end, rhythm begins. In the caves of Geissenklosterle in Germany, archaeologists unearthed flutes carved from vulture bone and mammoth ivory, dated to roughly 45,000 years ago, the oldest instruments known. Their tone can still be heard when replicas are played, high, clear, haunting. Music served many purposes: coordination during hunts, soothing infants, marking ritual. Neurologists note that music activates reward centers in the brain more powerfully than language, forging emotional unity. In small foraging groups, song was medicine against fear and loneliness, a shared vibration proving that no one faced the dark alone. Drumming, clapping, and humming likely predated instruments by tens of millennia. Even the act of striking stone against stone in tool-making carried rhythm. Perhaps that rhythm was the seed from which music grew. The imagination of belief. Alongside art and song came the earliest evidence of spirituality. Burials at Kafse, School, and later at Sungir show deliberate placement of bodies with ochre, beads, and tools, acts implying respect for the dead and perhaps belief in continuity beyond life. Whether they envisioned spirits, ancestors, or cycles of return, these gestures reveal that humans had begun to look past the visible world. Such cognition demanded the ability to imagine unseen agents, what psychologists call theory of mind, applied to the cosmos. From that mental leap grew myth, morality, and the sense that life carried purpose. Firelight conversations may have intertwined fact and metaphor. The bison we hunt returns each spring because the sky remembers us. Over time, such metaphors crystallized into story, humanity's first virtual reality. Networks of knowledge. Symbolic thought transformed communication from local to global. Personal ornaments made of shells from coasts hundreds of kilometers away appear deep inland, proof of exchange networks spanning continents. These routes transmitted more than goods. They carried ideas, techniques, and genetic diversity. Anthropologists describe this as the rise of the information age of prehistory, gossip, teaching, and storytelling binding communities into cognitive superorganisms. Language allowed mentorship. A skilled flint knapper could describe how to strike rather than merely demonstrate. A healer could list the properties of herbs. A navigator could teach the pattern of stars. Knowledge detached from individuals and began to accumulate collectively, the first step toward culture as inheritance. inside the mind's eye. Neuroscientists studying cave art note that many motifs, spirals, grids, zigzags, resemble visual patterns produced in altered states of consciousness. Perhaps these artists entered trance through rhythm or flickering light, translating neural visions into pigment. If true, art was not only expression, but exploration, the earliest science of the mind. Dreams, too, became raw material for culture. Hunter-gatherers today often treat dreams as messages or guidance. The same may have held true then. Sleep offered narrative rehearsal, problem-solving, emotional processing, functions identical to those measured in modern brains. Every morning, dream and daylight merged, blurring the boundary between internal and external worlds. Children of symbol. One of the most striking signs of modern cognition appears in childhood. Experimental archaeology shows that children learn tool-making and drawing through imitation and play, not rote practice. Footprints at the site of Laetoli and later at Tuc d'Odoubert include those of youngsters alongside adults, evidence that art and learning were family affairs. Through storytelling and imitation, culture reproduced itself faster than genes ever could. Each generation no longer started from zero. It inherited an expanding library of knowledge. Evolution had shifted from biological to cultural tempo. The mind reflects. By the end of this great flowering, humanity had become self-aware in a new way. People could recall the past, plan the future, imagine worlds that did not exist. This mental time travel is uniquely human. No other species composes narratives about what might be. Such awareness carried a cost: anxiety, grief, nostalgia. Emotions born from knowing one's own impermanence. Art, music, and myth were not luxuries but coping mechanisms for consciousness itself. They gave form to wonder and fear, allowing the species to live with both. From cave wall to screen, every symbol since, every alphabet, equation, or digital code, descends from those first pigments flicked onto stone. The urge to record, to share, to leave a trace, began there. The same neurological reward that once fired in a cave artist's brain now lights up when a message is sent, a song played, a story told. 50,000 years ago, humanity invented meaning. Everything since has been commentary. Legacy and continuity. The fire has burned low. Ash settles over bone and stone, but its heat endures, not in the embers themselves, but in every living descendant of those who once sat beside it. 50,000 years ago, our species stood at a crossroads. The glaciers were tightening their grip on the north. Deserts were widening in the tropics. Yet humans, tiny in number, perhaps no more than a few 100,000 across the entire planet, were already preparing to fill the world. The Great Migrations. Genetic evidence drawn from mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome traces almost all living people to a population that left Africa between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago. By the time of this story's dawn, groups had already reached the coasts of India and Southeast Asia. Others had moved north through the Levant into the cold plains of Eurasia. Across what was then a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, humans would eventually enter the Americas. To the south and east, rafts made of bamboo and driftwood carried others toward Australia. A voyage of at least 60 kilometers across open sea. That crossing, confirmed by the site of Majid Baby in northern Australia, dated to 65,000 years ago, remains one of the greatest achievements in prehistory. Each migration carried not conquest, but curiosity. Following the coasts, they harvested shellfish, lit fires on new beaches, watched unfamiliar constellations rise step by step. The planet became a human landscape. Encounters with other humans. Our ancestors were not alone on their journey. In Europe, they met the Neanderthals. In Asia, the elusive Denisovans. On islands, perhaps remnants of Homo floresiensis. The meetings were not all violent. DNA inside every non-African person today contains about 1 to 2% Neanderthal ancestry. In Melanesians and parts of Southeast Asia, Denisovan traces add another 3 to 5%. These were not symbolic mergers of species, but real families, shared fires, shared children, shared stories now lost. The genetic mosaic left behind improved immunity, altitude tolerance, and perhaps even aspects of skin and hair. Our species did not replace its cousins in a single moment. It absorbed them. Population and culture bloom. As climates warmed briefly after 45,000 years ago, human numbers grew. With numbers came innovation, new blade industries, tailored clothing, bone needles, and projectile weapons. Seasonal migration routes became predictable circuits. Groups met at rivers to trade stone, ochre, and mates. The archaeological record now thickens. Beads, pendants, musical instruments, figurines such as the Venus of Hohlfels, carved from mammoth ivory. These objects were not toys. They embodied identity and fertility. Social bonds expressed through beauty. From this period onward, the human story accelerates, yet the daily rhythm remains the same. Gather, hunt, teach, tell. The future civilization of temples and satellites still sleeps inside those routines. Caring and community. Fossils speak quietly about compassion. At Shanidar Cave, a Neanderthal skeleton nicknamed Nandi shows a withered arm and severe injuries. Yet he lived years after they occurred. Someone must have fed and protected him. At Cima de los Huesos in Spain and later at Sungir in Russia, burials contained children laid carefully with ornaments and ochre. Care for the weak and respect for the dead mark a turning point in evolution. Empathy became survival strategy. The societies that endured were those that valued cooperation over dominance. In that sense, morality predates civilization. The genome remembers. Modern genetics reads ancestry as if it were sediment. Every gene carries timestamps of adaptation, to altitude, to pathogens, to diet. The lactase persistence mutation allowing adults to digest milk would emerge only later, but others, regulating melanin, immune response, and fat storage, were already spreading. When scientists sequence genomes from ancient bones, they find echoes of climate in our blood, alleles that help generate heat in cold, protect skin from ultraviolet radiation, store energy during scarcity. Evolution never stopped. It simply changed tempo, guided now by culture as much as environment. Each of us is therefore a living fossil record, a walking archive of Ice Age experiments in survival. The continuity of mind. Though technology has changed beyond recognition, the mental architecture remains the same. MRI scans of modern brains show networks for empathy, creativity, and language indistinguishable in principle from those that shaped cave art and song. When we compose music, design tools, or share stories, we replay neural circuits forged in that ancient world. Even our emotional palette, love, jealousy, hope, grief, is a direct inheritance. Psychology, in that sense, is prehistory continuing by other means. The human planet. By 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens lived on 6 continents. Firelight now glowed from tundra and rainforest alike. Wherever humans went, extinctions followed. mammoths, giant ground sloths, marsupial lions. A pattern still debated between overhunting and climate change. What is certain is that humanity had become a geological force long before agriculture. Charcoal layers in lake sediments reveal frequent burning of grasslands, deliberate or accidental. Seeds of certain plants increase right afterward, early signs of ecological engineering. In reshaping the land to suit themselves, humans began the long prelude to the Anthropocene. Threads into the present. When we look at a campfire today, our eyes dilate the same way theirs did. Our hearing still tunes to the crackle of wood, the rustle of predators at the edge of light. Our social gatherings, our storytelling, even our religions echo those first circles of warmth against the dark. Genetically, culturally, emotionally, we are continuous with them. 50,000 years is a blink in evolutionary time. The child chasing sparks in a modern city park and the child tracing lines in Pleistocene dust share the same laughter. What endures? Civilization would later add architecture, writing, and machines, but the essential human triad remains: fire, story, and companionship. These were the tools that turned survival into meaning. They taught us not just how to live, but why. When we share food, protect the vulnerable, create art, or look up at the stars, we complete the circle begun by those first wanderers. The Ice Age ended, the glaciers withdrew. But their children never stopped moving, carrying light wherever the night was deepest.